So I haven't done a video in quite some time, just breaking down a fight card. And I mean, Fight Island, it's the big event of the summer. It's quite interesting, and I'm here to do that. First up, let's talk about the negatives of Fight Island here for just like a second. The fact that obviously in the world we have a need to have an event like Fight Island that was inspired by the idea of literally buying an island and having fights on it, which is not what has happened. This is a these fights will be occurring in Abu Dhabi at I don't believe it's even technically an island. I think it's a peninsula technically. But anyways, a area of Abu Dhabi that can be locked down effectively and handle a high level of testing and all that, and which is appreciated. It's going to be probably one of the safer cards of all time. Though the UFC is playing it up as if it's a big expense to them, the news reflects that it's actually the government of Abu Dhabi that is more or less paying for this, and in fact this will be a profitable event for the UFC, and they will continue to make some more money to prop up Endeavor's other failing business ventures. And that just goes back into the whole fighter pay thing. But let's get into the actual fights. Let's get into the happier side of this thing, and let's open up with the main event, which is Kymaro Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. This fight came together very, very late. Kymaro Usman, of course, we know what he brings to the table. He's an outstanding wrestler. Striking is developing. I think offensively he's becoming actually borderline competent, but the defense is still a little bit lacking, and I also think that his reaction to getting hit is still suspect. There were a number of times where Colby Covington laid into him, and it was very apparent that it troubled him. And Covington, of course, not a particularly hard hitter, not a man known for any kind of knockout power or even hurting power. And Jorge Masvidal is a guy who is known for that. George is an exceedingly well-rounded fighter, good striker, good wrestler, good grappler, a true jack of all trades, master, young veteran of the sport, guy who's been around for freaking ever. I'm making no secret of the fact that I am cheering for Jorge Masvidal in this fight, because it would be a similar moment to Robbie Lawler's win of the welterweight title. A guy who has put his dues in and helped build the sport at a time when there wasn't a lot of money in it for him, and kept at it, getting the title. There's a great story there, but I look at the fight, and as much as I can say to myself that Kymaro Usman has never beaten anyone really all that similar to Jorge Masvidal, in the sense that, I guess, to put it bluntly, just 1 second, I can make a quick adjustment here to the recording. There we go. So, as much as I can say that, Kymaro Usman has never beaten a guy like Jorge Masvidal, and I can see Jorge Masvidal knocking him out. I can see Jorge Masvidal even submitting him. Although the knockout would be, if you're hoping for a Masvidal victory, is what you're hoping for, I think. At the same time, there are certain things that Masvidal has a tendency to do that play into Usman's game. Predominantly, the fact that Masvidal has always been a kind of a fighter who doesn't really have his own game. It comes from that versatility of skills that I was talking about before, that he can do everything, is that he also has a pathological willingness to accept the fight that you want to give him, which in the case of Usman is probably to a degree a ranged kickboxing match that closes in and turns into a wrestling match against the cage, most likely. And the thing is that even in his wins over Darren Till and Nate Diaz, he was hoarded to the cage. It's just that he was dealing with people who didn't really have the game to capitalize on the position. And something that Usman absolutely does. I think he's going to be able to grind him up against the cage. I think he is going to be able to take him down. I think he is going to be able to control him. I think that there is a tremendous chance of Masvidal catching him on the feet. Because like I said, I'm not a big believer in Usman's defense. I'm not a big believer in how Usman handles getting hit with heat. And I think at some point Masvidal will hit him. But I just cannot see someone who isn't going to force Usman out of his game to get the victory beating Kymaro Usman. And that's because I think that, and to be clear, I don't necessarily even know who I would think would beat Usman in a fight, because I look at the welterweight crop that is in existence right now. And it's not like I thought Gilbert Burns was going to do it. Not like I thought Colby Covington was going to do it. So there is definitively that problem. And at some point I will be wrong because, George St. Pierre fell and, George didn't, air quotes, fall because he didn't lose to Johnny Hendricks, but that was a fight that kind of showcased the division was catching up to him. At some point, it will happen to John Jones. Of course, it happened to Ronda Rousey. It's happened to Anderson Silva. Happened to BJ Penn eventually. And something similar will happen with Usman. At some point, he'll either fall off as he gets older or someone will develop the skill set to defeat him. But I don't think that person exists now. And the fact that Masvidal isn't going to force him out of that fight means I have to pick Usman. So I'm going with Kymaro Usman by unanimous decision here to retain his 170-pound title. 145-pound title, Alexander Volkanovski defending against Max Holloway. I don't like this fight. This is an instant rematch fight, which I'm never really I'm not a fan of. Like outside of like a Randy Couture, Vitor Belfort type scenario, or a Matt Serra GSP, or a rematch that never happened at Aldo versus Conor McGregor. I know that's gonna get me labeled a Conor hater or whatever. That I don't believe that his win over Aldo meant that much. I just truly don't. I think it meant that Aldo made terrible mistakes and fought. A terrible mistake and fought. Let Conor get into his head basically, and knocked him out. And it doesn't mean that the win doesn't count or anything, but it's a match that has a lot more rematchability and interest. Whereas, for example, people want to see Khabib versus Conor too, and I have no idea why, as a Conor fan, you'd want to see that fight again, because it's not going to go much differently. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Volkanovski versus Holloway. There are some ideas that Holloway can win this fight, and that was the fact that late in the fight with Volkanovski the first time, he was able to turn the tide to a certain degree by just going to what he likes to do, walking through fire, in the case of Volkanovski's low kicks, and doing his thing. But he didn't do that for 4 rounds. And the question basically becomes, 2 questions. One, does Holloway have the ability to realize that that is what he has to do to get the victory? And 2, does Volkanovski know what to do if his A game from the first fight doesn't work? And it's fascinating in a way, but it is holding up the division. I still have to take Volkanovski to win here. I just look at, a very classic performance upending Max Holloway, talking about guys who I thought wouldn't get beat for some time and then did. As much as I see various avenues of this fight being different, I can't bet on any of them, and that's why I got to go with Alex Volkanovski. And that's not a case with all rematches. We're going to talk about a rematch later that I think actually has a different result coming to it. But I'm going to go with Volkanovski to win this fight. Weirdest title fight on this card, of course, is the bantamweight title fight with Peter Yan and Jose Aldo fighting over the vacant belt. It's very weird in the sense that I don't believe either of these guys should be the A side for this title fight. And that's what makes it exceedingly odd. I think that, frankly, Aljamain Sterling should be. Peter Yan has been amazingly impressive in his UFC run so far. A great combination puncher with amazing accuracy for the volume he throws out. A little bit of a problem maybe with more reserved, more counter-striking fighters. Uriah Faber flummoxed him just a little bit, and Jimmy Rivera considerably. And if Aldo can tune that kind of game in, maybe this becomes a competitive thing. But then you have Aldo, who's coming off a loss to Marlon Moraes, which was a reasonably better fight than what I was honestly thinking, because Aldo going down to 135 to me seemed like a really, really bad idea. And then the fight wasn't terrible. But at the same time, do I think he has the cardio to go 5 rounds? Do I think he still has everything he was? The best way I have to put to this is that there is a Jose Aldo that has existed in the timeline that would beat Peter Yan in his current incarnation. And that's, to a degree, the Aldo that beat the crap out of Uriah Faber, and probably actually the Aldo who won the 2 Frankie Edgar fights. But we haven't seen that Aldo in quite some time. Aldo is a guy who is 2-4 in his last 6 fights, with decent wins, Jeremy Stephens and Renato Moicano, but the losses, the 2 losses to Max Holloway and then Volkanovski and Marlon Moraes, who are all very, top-end fighters, but, it's kind of weird that Moraes is not getting this title shot. I understand why Moraes was taken out of the title picture initially. Of course, had that loss to Henry Cejudo, but then Cejudo retired. UFC wasn't willing to pony up the money for him, which goes back to the fighter pay thing I was getting into before. And as a result, we have this incredibly lackluster feeling title fight for a division that not too long ago was very, very exciting. You had the Dillashaw, Garbrandt, Cruz thing. Even after that, you had the Cejudo thing of double champion, Olympic champion. As cringy as it was, there was interest to it. And then we end up with this, a guy coming off of a loss and a guy who is coming off a win over a 2019 Uriah Faber. It was 2019 Faber, right? Let me just quickly look at the record here. Yeah, late 2019 Uriah Faber in a title match, and that is super weak sauce. All right, but to the fight. Like I said, I think that there is a version of Jose Aldo at one point that would have worked. But I think 2 things. Aldo's mentality, I think, is very, very different than it was at that time. And I think physically he's on the decline. As a result, as much as I think that the depth of his game and the fact that he is probably a far better striker than anyone that Jan has actually beaten will keep this competitive early, I just think that Jan, in a way not terribly dissimilar to Max Holloway, can break Aldo down. He's similar in the sense that he's basically kind of like a build-up fighter, a momentum. He gets rolling and he gets better and better and better and steps up the pace constantly. And that's something I don't think Aldo at 135 can match. So I think he just breaks him towards the end, both on a mental and a physical level, and probably finishes him in the 4th round. So I've got to go with Peter Yan here. That being said, this does mark a. Like I said, it's a far better, deeper striker anyways than Jan has ever fought before. I mean, we were talking about a guy whose wins in the UFC are over Teruto Ishihara, Jinsu Sun, Douglas Andrade, probably his best win actually. John Dodson, Jimmy Rivera, and Uriah Faber. So the question becomes, and before hitting the UFC, he fought a number of people who the jury is still to a degree out on, that we need to see step up in competition to. It's the problem with any regional scene is, to be honest, is that a 5-0 regional fighter, for example, might have fought 5 future UFC level fighters, but he also may have fought 5 complete duds, and that's just the nature of the beast, that you can judge it to a degree on the upcoming, but it's the UFC fights you have to look at. And as good as Peter Yan has looked, there's just no one on the level of Jose Aldo on that list. So there is still some mild intrigue in this fight, despite the fact that I think for a title fight it is garbage. Rematch, Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. This is a very interesting fight, not because of the stylistic matchup, because to be honest, the stylistic matchup I think favors Thug Rose heavily, and it's why I'm kind of leaning towards picking her in this fight. I think that Thug Rose on a technical level on the feet is way beyond Jessica Andrade, and Andrade's clinch game and her wrestling game it's so brute force. Everything about her is so physical. She's an amazing specimen of physicality for MMA. But the technical game is just so shallow that it becomes very hard to pick her against any elite fighter, just knowing that discrepancy exists. She, of course, beat Thug Rose for the title, knocking her out, slamming her twice in that fight, so it's definitely something she can replicate. But at the same time, she was getting pieced up by Thug Rose, and then very similar things by Weili Zhang. And we've seen it with really any of her other top-end competition here. Just to give some examples, pulling up her record real quick here. We saw some similar problems in the Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight, of course. Now, there are exceptions. She did bulldoze Claudia Gadelha, who I do think of as a pretty good fighter. She does have a win over Rose Namajunas. But, there were troubles even in the Tisha Torres fight. and the Angela Hill fight that just make it seem like there's a level of depth to there's a very shallow striking game there. And I'm going with Thug Rose to win, but the thing that is my hang up is a mentality thing, an emotional thing. And people get on me because I talk about mentality and emotion with female fighters a lot. I think I do it with male fighters too, but whatever. Someone did bring this up because I'm going to talk about that with Paige Van Zandt in a bit. And that is that Thug Rose pathologically does not like to be pressured, does not like to be pushed around. To a degree, no fighter does. The push around part anyways. A lot thrive on the pressure because they like to counter. They're back foot fighters. Tyrone Woodley, great example. Even for like a female one, Betchko Hea responds actually reasonably well to pressure. Would be an example. But that worries me because Andrade is all pressure, never the foot off the gas. For how tanked up she is, the cardio is amazing. Like I said, the physical attributes of Jessica Andrade is a top-end fighter. It's just there's just so little technicality to her game that I can't do it. Like that's the thing. I'm basically dealing with technicality with some emotional frailties within the fighting game versus physicality with none of the technicality to back it up. And I'm going with Thug Rose by unanimous decision, but this could go either way. This is a do not bet fight, I guess is what it comes down to. It's the one that I've wavered back and forth on by far the most. Paige Van Zandt and Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas is going to win this fight. I've said this repetitively, and it makes me seem like I'm really anti-Paige Van Zandt. I'm not anti-Paige Van Zandt the person. Seems like a lovely person. Like I don't just in general seems nice, but it doesn't seem like she enjoys fighting. And you kind of saw it with like the game that brought her to the dance was an alpha male designed scrambling game, and she doesn't really do that anymore. She's tried to do the TJ Dillashaw to a degree, turning into a ranged kickboxer a little bit, but she's done it without the Bang Ludwig factor, which made it work. And well, in light of TJ Dillashaw's PED issues, the EPO, and as a result, I don't even know if I'd pick her against any UFC caliber fighter, really. She has like an amazing stock in the sense that people know her, but they ignore the fact that this is an 8-4 fighter who in the UFC is gone, was it 5-3? Yeah, 5-3 in the UFC. Her wins are over Kailyn Curran, Felice Herring, Alex Chambers, Beck Rollins, Rachel Ostovich. I will forever love Alex Chambers, but she was up there in years for a fighter, and also very, very small, very unathletic. And then Kailyn Curran, we kind of thought it was a big deal at the time because Kailyn was 3-0 at the time, but she's since gone 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 and 6 since that time, and we're dealing with a girl who lost to Alex Chambers and Felice Herring and Jamie Moyle, Alexander Albu, Jenna Yan, Brianna Van Vuren, and then her wins are over not super relevant competition. So like that win, throw that out. Rachel Ostovich is probably not UFC caliber either. Felice Herring is, but is a very inconsistent fighter, I guess is what it comes down to. And then you've got Beck Rollins, who probably was UFC caliber when it comes down to it. But what made her UFC caliber was just a physicality and not a ton else, to be honest. And also, it should be mentioned that Beck Rollins has won one MMA fight since losing to Paige Van Zandt. So, hasn't had a ton, mind you. She's got 3 bare knuckle boxing wins, but a 8-9 record in MMA. It's just that for the shine on Van Zandt, there's not a lot of substance to it, and I hate to say it, it's a physical appeal thing. She speaks to the She speaks to the unfortunate reality of women's MMA, which is that a sexy girl with minimal skills is more appealing than a girl with really good skills who doesn't appeal to your dick. I mean, we kind of saw this with not that they weren't skilled, but like Gina Carano bringing the fight game significantly forward, but like on a skill level, not really. And then Ronda Rousey, even, who for a while had us kind of fooled into thinking that she was actually a really complete fighter, but it came down to like she just had a physicality that no one else could really match, and once it was matched, she was defeated. And we haven't had a female star really take the world by storm since. Honestly, like Amanda Nunes is still not as big of a star as either of those. Amanda Nunes may legitimately not even be as big of a star as Paige Van Zandt. That's really sad. Anyways, I've spent too much time on this fight. Amanda Ribas will probably defeat a very attractive, very heavily pushed and marketed, and probably doesn't even want to really be there anymore, Paige Van Zandt. And I don't really know. She just outmatches her everywhere. Volkan Oezdemir versus Yuri Prochaska. Or Prochaska. I've heard it pronounced both ways. We'll go with Prochaska. Yuri Prochaska, I'm very excited to see in the UFC. An amazing 205er in terms of physicality. Like, he is it's almost like John Jones in the early days. It's not quite that level, but it's very much there, where it's so explosive, so strong, so fast, so powerful, and absolutely no real technique or decent coaching that has actually gone into forming it into anything. So, as much as I'm like hoping he'll beat Volkan Oezdemir here, because I desperately want some new blood up at the top there, because there's a lot of fun matchups if he can get past Oezdemir. I also kind of want him to lose, because it feels like because of his price tag, he's going to be like kind of fast-tracked to the top of the division. And because of the fact that he has been fighting fairly good competition, don't get me wrong, but also incomplete competition, guys who are kind of past their prime, or guys who are kind of similar to him in like a big fish, small pond, like going over his recent resume. So I really became aware of him in the when he hit Risen and knocked out Satoshi Ichi, and then he beat Vadim Nemkov, who I think is a pretty good fighter, but in kind of a similar area to him, very physical, very one-dimensional. And then King Mo lost to King Mo, beat Fujita, went to a decision with Mark Tanios, which is still a bit weird. And then some other good wins here, Carl Albrechtsen, who I think is a really good fighter, and then Brandon Halsey, who's a pretty decent thing, but then Fabio Maldonado, King Mo, CB Dalloway, all very headed down here. I have to go with Volkan Oezdemir to win this fight. Oezdemir's stock has, I think, distinctly fallen in a way that probably is a bit weird. Because of that loss to Anthony Smith, which was now 2 years ago, a little bit less, October 2018. Because Anthony Smith has gone on to not do very well after that, if we're being honest. Like the win over Gustafsson notwithstanding, there was that two kind of sad losses to John Jones and Glover Teixeira that has completely ignored the fact that Oezdemir has gone the distance in a competitive fight with Dominic Reyes in a loss and a win over Alexander Rakic, who are amazing physical specimens, much like Prochaska, and the win over Ilir Latifi, which doesn't really have much of a bearing on this fight, if we're being honest. I just think that his game is way more put together, and the way Prochaska fights, I don't even think he goes to the distance, because I think Prochaska is a live by the sword, die by the sword kind of guy, really, when it comes down to it. I want to say he's never lost by decision, and I want to say that he has largely never really gone to decision that much. I know I mentioned the Tanios fight. So let's see, there's a Tanios fight, and then Had a draw back in 2014. That's all I'm really finding. So yeah, not a guy who goes the distance. Either his physicality and onslaught due to finish you, or he himself gets finished. And that's why I have to go with Volkan Oezdemir to pick up a probably second round stoppage. Probably a TKO, ground and pound, would be my guess. Because I don't think he puts him out on the feet, and his submission game is pretty limited. So yeah, I honestly, I'm kind of a case where I'm like much like Masvidal. I'm picking against him, but I am cheering for Prohaska because it's interesting. It leads to some things. Maybe we'll see. Further down on the grid, or further down here, not much to really talk about with the remaining fights. Eliza Zaleski versus Muslim Salikov is going to be a really, really fun fight, I think, unless Zaleski is just shot. That loss to the Leech really, I think, has affected him. And he did get that win over Alexei Kuchenko, who I think is a better fighter than Salikov. But his Salikov's lack of solid takedown defense and volume, I think, is definitely something that Zaleski, just on a stylistic matchup, should be able to handle with. So as worried as I am about the confidence and the psyche of Eliza Zaleski, I can't ignore the fact that this is a very favorable stylistic matchup for him. Makwan Americani versus Danny Henry. Talk about a guy who I'm always worried about the mentality of. It's Makwan Americani. Comes off as really, really confident, but there's something about his fighting that just puts a belie to that. That being said, I think he can swarm Danny Henry and probably tap him quick. Not dissimilar to how Dan Ige got the job done. Americani is an excellent grappler and submission guy. He just isn't very good at stand-up and is kind of... he's training at Straight Blast Gym Ireland, I do believe. Allow me to verify that before I go too far down this tangent. Yeah, Straight Blast Gym Ireland. And the problem has always been with SBG that they produced Conor McGregor, but more and more I'm very much convinced that Conor McGregor is a freak. It's not that they don't have other decent fighters. John Phillips is in the UFC. Cathal Pendrell. Gunnar Nelson has trained there to a bit. Ashley Daly. Makwan Americani. Artem Lobov. Paddy Houlihan, before he had to retire, was out of there. I want to say Chris Fields was, but I'm not seeing him on the list here. Kiefer Crosby is there. Brad Katona, even though I think that's a terrible idea for him to be with that team. And at one point I thought Jean-Michel Shale was going to be something, but that's not really come across. What I'm getting at is I don't think that it's really the gym it's really a gym that has any predictable results, and it's entirely reliant on you to make something yourself, which is more credit to Conor McGregor. I generally say negative things about Conor, but we do have to talk about the fact that, Conor McGregor made something out of himself in a gym that hasn't really had any comparable success to that. It's not like he came out of ATT or something. Anyways, I think despite the stand-up problems, Americani probably gets this done. Danny Henry's just not very physical. He is a scrapper. He is a dyed-in-the-wool fighter. But I think this is too much for him. Leandro Santos is here for his ever so often come out, and he's fighting Roman Bogatov. Unless Santos, who now is 40 years of age, has finally fallen off the truck, he will probably fire some decently straight punches and some looping and some weirdly effective striking, and then probably tap out Bogatov, who is a aggressive grappler who's going to go into a viper's nest. Marcin Tybura, Maxime Grishin. I think Grishin is coming to the UFC way too late, frankly. I guess he's not that old, I don't think. He's got 39 fights, but he is actually only 36, which for a heavyweight is not super old, but he is also quite small. I just think that Tybura is too big for him, and Grishin is way too willing to wrestle and grapple to deal with Tybura, and I think he probably gets tapped out eventually here or pounded out. So Tybura by stoppage in the second round. Raulian Paiva versus Lagos Zahumagulov. That's my best guess. Kazakhstani fighter. One of the... Well, we've seen a couple, I think, that have come out of Kazakhstan. I'm going with Paiva. I think that Paiva brings to the table a poor defensive style, but it's a very decision-winning style. It's a lot of volume, it's a lot of pace, it's a lot of pressure, and the wins that Zumagulov has had don't really gel well to that. Like, he has got a win over Ali Bagatinov. He's got a win over Tyson now. He's in the UFC now and doing quite well. But these are kind of like lower paced fighters. I just don't see his admittedly very composed fighting style really working out in this kind of fight. Like, it feels like he has to finish Paiva. And that's not... He's not that kind of big power and knockout kind of guy. So I've got Paiva. Not super convincingly, but I think he'll get it. Vanessa Mello versus Carros. Going with Carros. Or Rosa, I guess, because she's from Brazil. Honestly, kind of a very similar matchup to what I was just talking about with Paiva. She brings an unstoppable gas tank to the table. She pushes the pace. She throws out a lot of volume. I've just never been really all that impressed with Mello, who's 0-2 in the UFC and whose notable wins are like veteran Jan Finney and she did beat Molly McCann super early in Molly McCann's career, but I don't know. I'm not a big believer in Mello, who does have way cleaner technique just in every way than Rosa, but I think we'll just get outlanded, frankly, and if she doesn't finish Rosa, I don't think it works out. Or Rosa, sure, guys, Rosa. Martin Day versus Davey Grant. Going with Davey Grant here. I just think a little more imposing, a little bit more seasoned. I mean, he's literally only got 2 more fights, but the quality of Davey Grant's opposition is quite high. The 4 men he's lost to: Dale Dargan really early in his career, but then Chris Holdsworth, Damian Stosniak, and Manny Bermudez, who I think of as all very good grapplers. Something Martin Day isn't particularly. You can argue that, I mean, outside of Marlon Vera, his wins are not much better than Day's, but I think Day... I just don't think he's really a UFC caliber fighter, I guess is what it comes down to, which this tends to be the thing that happens at the bottom of the pile, is that you have a guy who has proven to be at least on the UFC level versus someone who is not, and isn't like a super great athlete, isn't a super great person before MMA, and as a result, Davey Grant. I know those last couple of fights didn't get a lot of technical breakdown on, and it's because they're not overly complex fights. That kind of, and that's not a bad thing. Like, I mean, I didn't give it a tremendous amount of time, but like, I'm really looking forward to Zaleski Dos Santos versus Salikov. I think that's going to be an excellent barn burner of a fight. It's not complex. I think that Americani and Henry, while it'll probably be fairly short, it's going to be fun while it happens, even if it's, again, not a very complex fight. Paiva versus I'm going to kill myself here. Zumagulov will be similar. Like, these are all fun fights. Just not actually ones with a tremendous amount of depth to them. So anyways, that's UFC Fight Island coming up tomorrow. Hope you enjoy it. And the only thing I'll add in the world of MMA after this is, if you're defending Mike Perry on his recent rampage, I don't know what to say. Like, people are like, "Oh, the old guy came at him." I'm like, unless you're disputing the facts that he may have already knocked out 2 people before it got to that point, I don't see how that's a defense. It's a what did you expect to happen? Fair enough, but it is Mike Perry is just a hazard. Whatever. I don't really have any like logical breakdown on that. But anyways, Fight Island, enjoy.